Hi, I'm Ira Wallace with Southern Exposure Seed Exchange here at Acorn Community Farm, and I'm for the soil because the soil is the basis of our agriculture. Soil grows our plants, and I love good soil.
Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining me, Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Mary, would you do the honors of introducing our guest today?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm excited to have Nicole Shuman with us. Nicole is the community agriculturalist at Cornerstone Farm at Fairfield Middle School in Henrico County, Virginia, and so has a really interesting background across the board, including work internationally with the Peace Corps, locally with cooperative extension, and now doing outreach education and agricultural work. And so just excited to hear about your background and how there's so many intersections around soil health and agriculture. So welcome, Nicole. And to start, would love to hear a little bit about how did you land into this community agriculturalist position? How did you go from working internationally to locally to now doing this work?
Yeah, a great question. A lot of people, when they sort of first hear about what I do, it's that, well, how did you end up there, of all places? And certainly it has been a bit of a journey. In undergrad, I actually studied government, so basically political science. And then following that, I actually started working on farms. It was not something that I was necessarily familiar with beforehand. We had a garden growing up, but I grew up in the suburbs, basically. Found that I really enjoyed farm work, but wanted to learn more because, as I was out in the field working with, some of my employers, we'd get to talking and I'd ask questions and it would be like, well, what do you do about soils being able to retain moisture? And the answer would be, well, organic matter. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do about soils that are really waterlogged? And the answer the farmer would give me, well, you need more organic matter. And it's like, well, how does that work? How can organic matter be responsible for both of these behaviors in soil, the ability to retain and also the ability to drain water? And that and so many other things I got very curious about and realized that I wanted a little bit of that kind of formal education to back it up. So I enrolled in the Cornell University's Masters of Professional Studies in International Agriculture and Rural Development, which I apologize, that is a mouthful. And that had some classroom-based learning, but then also my project piece was based in the Peace Corps as one of their Master's International students. So I was in Paraguay for that, working in their agricultural sector. And then following that, I returned home, and extension I had learned about in graduate school because Cornell University is, of course, the land-grant university up there. And it seemed to dovetail quite a bit with my experience in the Peace Corps. And so I started working for Virginia Cooperative Extension and did that for about 5 years. I was in Prince Edward County and then also in Goochland County, worked with smaller farms, direct marketing farms, then also Master Gardeners programs, the Soil and Water Conservation District. Did a lot of different things, which is sort of one of the beautiful but also challenging parts about extension. But the thing that I probably missed the most was being out in the field on a daily basis. And this position, it's kind of insane to me that this kind of position exists because it is a public school position. I am based at a middle school, Henrico County Public Schools Middle School, and they have a farm. And, the school itself is built on old farm land. And at some point, probably around 2015, 2016, they started putting in raised beds. It grew. A nonprofit started to get behind the farm effort. And so, now we have kind of like a little market garden. We have probably about 0.6 of an acre that's an orchard. We're about to put in a riparian buffer area. We're going to do the installation on that this winter. And then there's some additional acreage that over the next couple of years I'm hoping to phase into production as we continue to grow the farm, to provide food for the community, but also to provide more opportunities for our students to actually get outside, because the student body at Fairfield it's over 900 students. And as you can imagine, our current size of our market garden, which is wonderful, but it's only about 8/10 of an acre, which is pretty small. So if we're going to provide every single child with a learning opportunity over the course of their middle school career, not to mention bringing in field trips and stuff like that, we just need more space. But backing up a little bit, the farm was mostly managed by the nonprofit for a number of years. And then probably in 2022, I want to say, maybe it was 2021, the county got behind it and funded my position, which is full-time, the community agriculturalist position. So I'm based at Fairfield. I'm not a teacher, but I am in the classroom quite a bit and working with students quite a bit. But my primary job is just keeping the farm running. A long version, I suppose, of my background, but there it is.
And Nicole, if you could, your time with the Peace Corps and working in Paraguay, South America, if you see any commonalities related to soil quality, soil health with that experience and working in Virginia that you could share.
Yeah, it was definitely very different working in Paraguay, simply based on the climate, and also the history and the kinds of soils that they have in Paraguay are different than the soils that we have in Virginia, just because of the climate regime that they've been subjected to over the years. They develop a little differently. So that was kind of interesting, just being in an environment where I was surrounded by kind of like unfamiliar plants. The kinds of weeds that grow, for instance, are going to be very different. But some of the things that I worked on are the same best practices that we use here in the US, such as cover crops, and diversifying the home garden, to just provide that diversity in the soil to support all of the little organisms that are living there. And things like compost. So a lot of Paraguayans, they'll keep animals, but the manure was frequently not composted before using in the garden, and so it was really, really exciting when I built my first compost pile with one of the families in the community. For a hot compost system rather than a cold compost system. And we layered everything, built it up pretty big. And I honestly I had composted at home in the States, but I had never deliberately built like a hot compost pile. And I came back probably a week later, and, we opened it up a little to turn it, and it was steaming. And it was, I was like, I was astounded. I couldn't believe that it had worked. And I feel like a lot of my, a lot of what I do with students, but also a lot of what I was doing as a Peace Corps volunteer was like, well, we'll try it and we'll see if it works. And sometimes the results were really, really surprising. But yeah, certainly a lot of the practices that we talk about are going to be the same.
We're talking today with Nicole Shuman. She is, I believe you described it as community agriculturist.
Yes.
And I want to bring it back to what you're doing now. You have such an interesting background, but what you're doing now is you're working with youth. You're working with kids, specifically, I believe, middle school kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a school bus driver for a number of years, and I can remember I never had any issues with the little kids in elementary, never had any issues with the big kids in high school. It was always those middle school kids. That's just a stage of life that is just kind of testing your boundaries and trying to find out what interests you. So my question to you is, how do you get middle school kids interested in soil health?
Yes, a great question, and I don't know that I exactly have the answer to it yet. Certainly, the more hands-on, the better. It is, yeah, middle school is very interesting developmentally, and I don't have a background in child development or anything like that. But certainly the things that I remember from my middle school experience are the hands-on things. It's none of my classroom time has any memory. It's like I've blacked it out. But the stuff that we did outside, the field trips we went on, I had a 7th grade science teacher who, took us around the school to get us to identify some of the trees. And, we did the James River field trip where we got in the canoes, and it's the hands-on stuff. And so some of the things that we've done with students this year have been actually an activity or a lesson that I learned in extension and used to do with 5th graders, which is apple earth, where you take the apple and it's a model of the earth, and you talk about how much topsoil there is available on earth to produce everything we need to produce. That was fun. We were able to do that with apples that we actually grew on the farm this year. And so that's been a very good one. The one that I think has been most popular with students is Soil Your Undies, which is an activity that I actually learned about by attending a For the Soil training at
Explain
VSU.
that to our listeners who have not heard that term before. Soil your undies.
Exactly. Well, you get you go to Walmart and you buy a pack of tidy whities, and I think the bigger the better. XL, XXL. I think that's really that's what the students love to see. But you bring them into class, you hold them up, and the kids are all like, they all react. Even though they're middle schoolers and they're trying to be cool, like underwear is still funny to them. So they, they're immediately engaged. They're like, what the heck are we doing? What is going on? And then we bury the underwear. We bury it all around the farm. I try to engage the students further by allowing them to choose some of the places that we select the underwear. I'm not the one who's trying to just say we're going to do here, here, and here. Let them choose. We go out, we bury it, we wait 2 months, and we dig it up. And then we see what has happened to the underwear and why that has happened to the underwear. And it's a really good way to show the biological activity of different soils based on how much that underwear has decomposed, because of course they're made out of cotton. Cotton is organic. And so some of the places that we buried the underwear this year, we just buried it in the lawn. I was like, this is when I did a demonstration of how it would work. I was like, this is what's going to happen. We're going to bury it in the lawn. Then y'all are going to choose some other places. So we buried it there. We buried it in the raised beds, which of course are filled with a soil media and not true soil. We buried it in our main garden, which is in ground and has, soil. We buried some in the orchard where, we have like a perennial sort of turf grass situation growing there. And we buried some. I had some students who really, really wanted to bury the underwear in that kind of riparian buffer area that we have. And I was like, we're doing some site prep there. We're getting ready to plant. Like, we can't bury it there, but there's a wet spot because it's right near a sprinkler that is keeping some nursery plants hydrated over the summer. I was like, there's a spot that holds a lot of water. It's a little low spot. It collects a lot of water. So the soil is very wet there. So let's bury some underwear there. And the students went for it. Oh, and the compost pile. You have to bury one in the compost pile. And then, we dug them all up and got to compare how much they had decomposed, which of course is that measure of biological activity and sort of by proxy, a measure of soil health. And that was really, really exciting. We got some really interesting results. The students who buried their underwear in that wet spot were confident that it would decompose more. That was part of the hypothesis they wrote. They really, really thought that underwear was going to decompose a lot. And it didn't. It was actually, it was mostly intact when we pulled it out. And so we got to have a conversation about the little critters that live in the soil that do that hard work of decomposing. They need the same things that you and I need. They need air. They need to be able to breathe. It's that aerobic decomposition. And, that's why soil pores are so important. That's why, keeping a good soil structure to allow that airflow is really, really important. When soil pores are compacted or when they're filled with water, the little critters that live in soil can't do the hard work of decomposition that, contributes to cycling nutrients, to adding organic matter, and to performing all those functions that we find vital in a healthy soil.
Sounds like a real light bulb moment. And Mary, I know you've got a question. I'm going to ask you to hold that question for our next episode, if you would. We've got about a minute remaining, but that light bulb moment we talked about with middle school kids and, soil your undies. Do teachers have a lot of resources, and what are a couple of those resources quickly?
For
learning about soil health.
For learning about soil health? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, for teachers at Fairfield, there's me, but I'm not at every school, unfortunately. I certainly, For the Soil has a number of resources online. I would encourage every teacher to reach out to their local 4-H and extension office, because frequently they have lesson plans and are able to do those kinds of activities with students. And USDA NRCS has a number of resources. I've found resources from I think it's the Soil Science Society of America, SSA, or something like that. I found lesson plans through them. There's a number of resources out there. You just have to know who to ask and where to look.
Well, great. We're going to ask you to stay with us. Nicole Shuman. She is a community agriculturalist in Central Virginia. And Mary and Eric, we're going to continue this in a part 2 episode. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with Nicole Shuman.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, y'all.
I wanted to quickly remind everyone that Earth Day is coming up on April 22nd. Earth Day is celebrated annually, and you might not be aware of what is Earth Day. Well, it's basically just one day out of the year that is dedicated to raising awareness about environmental issues and promoting efforts to protect our planet. And of course, soil health is one of those efforts. For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, just visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program is provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.